everybody, thanks for joining us here today. This is Nicole with Topaz, and today's session is with Blake Rudis. He's going to be presenting a session called Compelling Artistic Portraits. Hi, Blake.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Welcome back. This is Blake's 22nd session. We are big fans of his, and I'm excited to see what he has to show for you here today. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Blake.
Awesome. All right, so before I begin, I want to start by saying thank you to Nicole and Topaz. We were just talking before the record button went live about how there was something like 550 people already in this webinar. And, you know, when you think about that, it's kind of mind-boggling that we're sitting here, you know, all learning something, and we don't have to be in a giant room to do it. It's really, I don't know. Maybe I'm not one of those new age people as new age as I think I am anyway. So before we begin, I want to start talking about this image in particular and kind of my idea of Renaissance portraiture and how we're kind of getting away from that in this new digital age of imagery. And if you're not familiar with Renaissance portraiture, just go ahead and Google it, and you'll see a plethora of great images from some of the greats like DaVinci and Michaelangelo and so on and so forth. And one of the things about Renaissance portraiture is that you often find them doing two things. Either A, it's a really interesting bust shot showing the hands and the arms up, cut off at about the stomach, and sometimes you also see them in the act of doing something. So I kind of wanted to mix this digital age with the Renaissance age and see what it would be if I were to do a Renaissance portrait of Tony Stark. So yeah, this is me as Tony Stark. Kind of interesting background story on this. My son, he's 4, and he says, "Dad, what are you going to be for Halloween?" And I had no intention of really doing much of anything for Halloween. And then I said, "I don't know, boy, what do you want me to be?" I call him boy. It's a term of endearment in my house. And he goes, "Well, how about Tony Stark?" And I was like, how am I going to pull off a Tony Stark costume? So I went into my garage and I saw that I had an old power supply. That was an old beat up power supply. I don't recommend taking apart a power supply. I think there might be something toxic in there. I don't know. But so I took it apart, you know, unbeknownst to me if there's any issues with that. Took it apart and I used all the parts to make this almost prototype looking Tony Stark arm. And if you're unfamiliar with who Tony Stark is, he is the billionaire genius behind Iron Man. So in Iron Man's costume you have Tony Stark. Okay, so a very interesting impression that I did. I shaved my face to look like him. I got an LED touch light with some Velcro, sewed it to a shirt underneath, and hit the tap light. And I was walking around. I was the coolest dad in town because you could see me from a mile away. So that's the background on it. And then after I was thinking about it, I was, you know, this would be a really cool portrait session. What would it look like if we were to see a Renaissance portrait of Tony Stark sitting in his basement tweaking his repulsor rays? So that's what this is. Okay, so here is the after. This is after all the Renaissance work that we've done, and this is a before. So you can see the before is really nothing more than what looks like a snapshot of the scene. Just in more background on this image, if you want more of the technical stuff, I'm sitting there with a Canon 6D on a tripod. I took this image by myself from my phone, so I had to focus everything on my phone with a 10-second timer, press the record button, and hope to God that I had good focus. It's a very difficult thing. I probably took about 250 shots during this session and only had maybe one that I could walk away with that I actually liked. Okay, so in this process, I'm going to show you how we use Topaz Clarity to get the colors right. I'm going to show you how to make this little chest blast thing underneath my the thing that keeps Tony Stark alive. I'm going to show you some frequency separation stuff in Topaz Details. So here it is before and here it is after, using Topaz Detail as a frequency separation, which is a really interesting technique. And then using Topaz Impression to make 2 interesting layers, and then Topaz Glow to make it glow, and then texture effects. And also I'm going to show you something really cool that it's kind of like an afterwards frequency separation where you can recover detail even after you've done your impression work like this. All right, so it's very impressive, it's very quick, and it's very easy. So let's go ahead and jump into it, and we'll see what we can come up with in the end here. Okay, let's go ahead and open up the image. And I'm going to start this in Adobe Camera Raw. And the reason why is because I'm 33 years old, so I'm giving away my age in this one, but I still have the face of a 13-year-old, okay? So it happens, you know, it's like, come on. Here I am as a teenager thinking, I can't wait till I'm older. I'm never going to have a zit again. And here I am, 33, saying, when is this going to stop? So this is the naked truth about portrait photography. In Adobe Camera Raw, in Lightroom, and also in Photoshop, you have these tools that can be used to remove spots. Now, for me, on an ethical standpoint, there are certain spots that I will remove when it comes to my portrait work. I'll remove temporary things like zits. I'll remove scars. I'll remove scabs. I'll remove anything that could essentially heal. A couple things I will not remove are going to be like right here. I have a birthmark in my eye. I'm not going to remove that because that is me. That is who I am, okay? So basically how this spot removal tool works is it's right up here in Adobe Camera Raw. There's also a couple tools in Photoshop called like the spot healing tool, that are the healing brush, and all these really great tools to do that. But what I really like is the spot removal tool in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, because you get a brush size that's about the size of the object you want to go ahead and remove. Make sure it's got a nice feather on it like you see here, and you just click anywhere on that item, and it's going to give you a green circle from where it's selecting it from. So I'm going to select something pretty local, something like right here. And I'm just going to go through here and click on all these, you know, imperfections that are on my face. You know, love being human. We have imperfections. Some people think I'm an alien because of the amount of content that I put out per month, but that's not true. I'm human. I get zits. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going here. Don't want to pull that one from my ear. So you click there, and it's trying to pull something from my ear, and it doesn't look right. So I'm just going to go from somewhere like right here. So we'll keep going. We'll just do a little one right here because there's a little spot right there from my haircut, and maybe a little bit right here, and then a little one on my chin right here. And that will pull from right about here. But other than that, I'm not going to do too much more with that because all the other facial blemishes on there are part of who I am. That like freckles on my face, you know, those types of things, I'm going to leave those be, okay? I'm even fine with shaving stubble. That's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and press Open Image. I'm not going to do anything else in Adobe Camera Raw at this point because the rest of what I'm going to do is going to be in Topaz Products to really showcase what you can do with Topaz Products. If, for instance, you don't own Photoshop, you can be using some of these techniques in Topaz Clarity and Detail and so forth. So the first thing I need to do here is crop this image because it looks horrible. If you notice something about Renaissance portraiture, a lot of times they either go with like a really tight crop, or they have on the outside of the person, on the outside of their bust, they'll have like a landscape image in the background. So I'm going to do the tight crop technique here. I'm just going to go right here on the top of my head, come right over here to the back of where my shoulder is so I cover up that chair, and then just come up here to about the bottom of my elbow, and then really right into here. And that will give me more of an intimate crop for this Renaissance portrait that we're about to conduct here. So if you'll notice, Tony Stark, Iron Man, the images that I showed before, he's got the glow of his chest is underneath his shirt. Now, if I was outside, these batteries are running low after being out for Halloween, but you can see that I've got an LED glow light under here. And it didn't show up because I'm using a flash, and that flash is really powerful. So now I need to get that back. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a little bit about compositing work here too. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new layer. And I'm going to get a brush that's about the size of the area that I want to cover, and I'm going to right click and make sure that my hardness is set to something like 50%. What that's going to do is it's going to give me a nice feather on the outside of that glow. Now this is not enough. If we were to just do this, it looks contrived, it looks trite, it looks like someone just took a brush and slapped it on my chest. So I'm going to press Command or Control T, and that will allow me to transform this. So I'm going to slightly transform it, so give it some perspective so it looks like it's actually laying on my chest. So that's the first part. When you press Command or Control T like that, you can press the control buttons and really kind of just skew this. So Command or Control, as you skew this, you can manipulate the shape pretty easily. It's basically free transform when you do that. So I'm going to zoom into there again, and I'm going to double click right here. Right next to it, that'll bring you up into your layer styles. So with these layer styles, I want to do an outer glow to give this kind of a yellowish outer glow. So I'll just click the outer glow and see what that gives me. So by default, I really do like the outer glow that I'm getting at this point, and I'm cool with that exactly where it is right now. And then I'm going to do bevel and emboss. And the reason I'm doing bevel and emboss, if we saw the image before, it almost looks like this light is coming from a crater in his chest. So I'm going to change the angle of this shading so that the angle happens right here. So you see kind of a dark spot right here. I'm going to change that right over to here. Okay, and with that bevel and emboss, you can see the depth of this now. We can actually get some depth on there. Okay, so a little bit of depth on there. And then I'm going to go to this thing called contour right here. And with this contour, you can actually change the shape of the object that's underneath based on the bevel and emboss. So I can actually give this a look like it's an object, like it's a circular object that's underneath my chest. At this point, it still looks like it's resting on top of my shirt, but you can see as I adjust this, it really starts to look like a circular can with a light coming out of it. So I'm going to move that up a little bit so it's about right there. So at this point, it's almost looking good, but you can see that it looks like it's just resting on top of my shirt, when in actuality, if we just press OK, this should be under my shirt, not on top. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to zoom into it again, double-click right next to it again, so I'm back in those layer styles. And you see this thing that says blend if. Basically what this means is that I want to protect anything underneath this object that is black. So as I move this over, you will start to see how this object starts to go under my shirt as I move this over. Alter option, spread that. It's like magic. All right, let's show this again. I'm going to show blend if another time here. So I'm going to move this over until it starts to disappear under my shirt, and then press alter option to feather it in so that some of those threads from the shirt actually start to pick up. All right, now look at that. It almost looks exactly like that is under my shirt. Let me just go ahead and move this to the proper position and then drop the opacity down a little bit so that it's not quite so glowing. Because if that's pure white, our eye is naturally going to go right to there, and I'm going to lose you in the rest of the photo. So that's some of the magic of composite work and how you can actually build these things right in Photoshop without any other objects or anything. So I'll put that right about right there. That looks good. Command or Control T and just rotate it a little bit more. Okay, there we go. So now at this point, I'm ready to jump into Topaz Clarity. I'm going to press Control, Shift, Alt, and E, and that's going to go ahead and make a stamp. The hotkey for that again is Control, Shift, Alt, and E. Basically, turn your hand into like this octopus tentacle and try to hit all the keys at the same time with one hand. It's a good challenge. On the left-hand side of the keyboard, you can do that. On a Mac, that's going to be Command, Shift, Option, and E. And basically what that says is that everything that's underneath this object, this is just a stamp. It's almost like a photocopy, a carbon copy of everything that's happening underneath. So if we even turn these eyeballs off, you don't even know what's happening here, okay? That's what a stamp is. It's just a temporary stamp of everything underneath it. I'm going to rename this Clarity because that's where we're going in now. You'll notice that there's a few Topaz plugins that I lean really hard on, and one of the main ones is going to be Clarity. I really do enjoy what Clarity has to offer because it's kind of like the zone systems that I use, but in a very compressed program, and it gives you, 4 different options instead of 11 different options like the zone systems do with your micro contrast, your low contrast, your medium, and your high contrast. And the beauty of this program is that there is quite a bit of ability to adjust tone and color in Topaz Clarity. So what I mean by that is the first part of my workflow is adjusting tone and adjusting color. Okay, so I want to get the tone and the color technically perfect before I go into the artistic effects. And you might be wondering why. And I was actually thinking about this last night. My son and I were making meatballs. I'm like the meatball champion. I make the best meatballs in the world. I guarantee I'll throw down with you if you want to do a competition. So we're making meatballs, and I'm thinking to myself as I'm making these meatballs that using Topaz Clarity and getting your workflow right so you get tone and color first is kind of like the same concept of making meatballs. Someone would say, well, just make the meatball, you can just eat it. Well, you can't just eat it because you have to cook it first. You have to prep it the right way first. So in order to get that end product or that artistic result, let's say the end result is a cooked meatball, all right, you have to go through all of these paces in order to get to that point. So you have to throw the spices in there, and each one of your spices is a different program. If you didn't throw that spice into there, your end result would not be the same. Okay, so if you think, why don't you just throw this into Impression, Blake, and make it a Renaissance image? Well, it just doesn't work that way. You have to spice it the right way. You have to prep it the right way so that you can get the right product in the end. Okay, so what I'm going to play with here are the different, basically in this form here with Topaz Clarity, I really want to get my histogram correct. I want to get my black levels, my white levels, and my midtones correct. And then I'll also show you some things that you can do with the micro contrast and your clarity here. So, and what this is going to equate to is almost a form of frequency separation. I'm going to show you that in detail also. So I'm going to go to my histogram, and if you look at my histogram, everything's pretty dark. There's not a whole lot of white in it. I can see that because over here there's no white. Well, if I want more white in my image, I'm basically telling my histogram here, go to the white level and push the histogram to the right. And as I push the histogram to the right, notice how everything gets brighter. Well, if I go over here, I'm going to have some blown highlights, especially these highlights on my forehead. That's not good. We don't want that. So you can see just before we get to the edge there, I want to push this over so that we get some nice white highlights in there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the black levels. I'm going to see what happens if we make this a little less black and then maybe a little bit more black. Well, I like it with a little bit more black in there, so I'm going to move the histogram to the left-hand side to add more black values to those pixels. And then you have the same concept here with your midtones. Do you want your midtones, your mid colors, or your mid-tone areas to be more on the white side, or do you want those mids to be more on the dark side? Each one of these is going to give you a different stylized look. So I'm going to move it to the right a little bit, really kind of lighten this image up, especially with some of the stuff that I'm going to be doing later here. So I'm going to give you a warning. We're going to get uncomfortably close to my my Tony Stark mug here, okay? And we're going to do this quite often. So I hope you like me because I like you. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go really close here and look at some of the detail in my forehead. Now you see things here. I told you I was human, and humans have blackheads on their nose. They also have areas on their face that even after they shave, they don't quite get. Okay? These are things that we don't necessarily want to show in our portraits, but they come across anyway. Pores. Pores, yeah, it's nice if you're doing a macro of an orange, but I don't want my face to look like a macro of an orange. So what I'm going to do here is if you see the micro contrast, see how the micro contrast as I boost this up, typically we're used to doing that to get more detail out of our images. So I'm going to drop this down, actually, and as I drop this down to the left, watch how with that micro contrast things start to smooth out. Now, typically, this is what you might see in a fashion magazine, okay? Pasty, plasticky looking people. But that's not what people look like, so don't do that kind of thing. So I'm going to just move that down just a slight bit down, okay? That's going to give me some nice prep work going into Topaz Details. So we'll look at our original and then after. What this does is it helps clean up some of these areas. Another thing that I'm not going to fix are these areas in my eye here. Now, you see how this is slightly, almost looks like someone punched me in the eye? That's something that's hereditary. To me, I don't look at that as a personal flaw. I embrace that as something that I was born with. My grandmother has it. My father has it. It's just, it makes us look like we have, I guess, more deep onset eyes, I guess. So I'm not going to change that. I don't want to change that because if I did, it wouldn't be true to the reality of who Blake Rudis is, okay? Another thing that I want you to notice here in Topaz Clarity that's also very nice is the ability to adjust color. And specifically, I want to look at the color of, say, my face. Okay, so the colors that you're going to find on my face are going to be in this HSL filter. So you can look at the hues of the different colors. Typically, you're going to see most skin tones come in the color of red. So if I move this over, you might find that some of the skin tones on my face are red. This is a way that I guess you could do makeup in Topaz Clarity if you wanted to. I got nice pink magenta lipstick on. Oh, that's so pretty. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to move that down to about right here. So now we'll go to our oranges. And you can see that a lot of my skin tone comes in the color orange. So I can make my skin a little bit more on the reddish side. I can make it a little bit more on the yellow side. I can look like I've got maybe a little bit of jaundice there or something. But I'm going to move it down just a little bit just to make it a little bit more on the warm side. Okay, so with my oranges on the warm side. Then we'll look at yellows. It looks like yellow just really controls some area around my neck. Not a whole lot of issue there. So I'm getting my color right. I'm getting some of my facial color correct. If we look at the saturation, it can look like I spent a little bit too much time on the beach in Hawaii last week. So I'm going to move that down a little bit to get a more natural skin tone. So drop the saturation a little bit in those oranges to give me a more natural looking skin tone. Now I'm getting more peaches coming through here. And the same thing with the saturation. There again, I've got pretty red lips now instead of the magenta as you saw before. And you can do this with the other colors too. If you want the blues to be a little bit more saturated, go ahead, just hike those blues up a little bit, give that a little bit more of a natural look of my t-shirt. It doesn't look like I washed it too many times, like my wife would complain because I make my colors look bad, so I no longer do laundry anymore. So then we'll go to the luminosity of these colors, and let's look at the luminosity of the color orange, and that's going to be your lightness and your darkness of your color. So if we move this to the left, it'll just boost up some of the vibrance or the gamma that's in that color. So we get more white added to our color orange, or we get more black added to our color orange. To me, that looks about right right there. So here's our original, here's our after. So if you notice what we did here, we cleaned up the tone and the color. What we also did was we cleaned up some of the micro contrast and some of those details to really kind of smooth out those details in my face a little bit, to clean up some of those mild imperfections on my face, the blackheads, like I said, the temporary things. I'm not going to fix my my hereditary black eye that I get from my Ukrainian relatives. I'm not going to do anything with that. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and press OK. My grandmother actually came from the Ukraine. She's a very interesting woman. She has some awesome stories to tell as life goes on. I loved hearing her stuff. So now, here's the before and after. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing I did before, which is that Control, Shift, Alt, and E, and that's going to duplicate all of that stuff and give me a stamped layer of everything. So now I'm working on multiple layers building up. Some people say, well, why don't you use smart objects? And you can use smart objects. I'm not saying that anyone shouldn't use smart objects. I personally prefer to use multiple stamp layers because I get more control over them. When I save them, the file sizes aren't as large. Smart objects tend to bog down my system. There are instances where I will use smart objects, but in this instance, I like the ability to get multiple different masks and be able to run things a little bit smoother. So I'm going to go to Filter, Topaz Labs, and go to Detail. And detail is interesting because we're actually going to be doing anti-detail here. If anyone's ever done frequency separation, I'm not going to talk too much about what frequency separation is here because it's a portraiture thing, and I could really do an entire webinar just on frequency separation. Okay, basically what it is where you separate the details from an image from the actual look and feel of the image by using a Gaussian blur layer and a high-pass sharpen layer, and then you can do some clone stamping on the Gaussian blur layer, and that's a rudimentary way to explain what that is. But there's a much easier way with Topaz Details. So typically what we're used to seeing with detail, okay, is the ability to hike up and increase detail. So again, look at my face here. As I hike up and increase this detail, this would be great if you wanted a portrait of a coal miner, but Tony Stark is not a coal miner. He's a billionaire genius. We don't want him to look like that, okay? So we'll just go ahead and drop that down a little bit. Now, watch what happens in these very small details here. So here you have your small details, you have a small detail boost, your medium details, medium detail boost, and large details and large detail boost. Basically what that is as you increase the small details, you can also give them a nice kind of turbo boost behind them to really hike up those details a little bit more. But we don't really want to do that here. I typically will use detail as an output sharpening method, but you don't have to just use it for output sharpening. You can do it for this frequency separation. Again, we're going to get uncomfortably close to my face. Okay, so let's go to something like my nose, or right here where we have these pores. So look at the small details as we move this up. They get really, really amplified. But watch happens as we move it down. As we move it down, you start to see that some of the detail still sticks around on my face, but for the most part, it just smoothly transitions in. So if we bring that boost down maybe and then boost up the small details a little bit, you can see that we're starting to separate our detail from our imperfections. So what I mean here is you look at like maybe my facial hair. That's starting to get a nice little boost to it, but the details in and of themselves are kind of smoothing out a little bit. When we're sitting here in the overall area, that we don't have a whole lot of control over that because it's boosting our shadow detail and our highlight detail. But what happens if we go into just the highlight area and move down the highlight details? As we move down just the highlight details, it's still, for the most part, resurrects our shadow details. Okay, so we can get this kind of frequency separation thing going on here, and we can just boost our shadow detail up a little bit more, and then get some of that kind of growing back on the face there. And there we have it. So we have a little bit of a frequency separation here. You can do the same thing with your medium details. So let's say you want your small details to have a slight boost to them, but your medium details, those details that are just a little bit bigger, to smooth out a little bit more. So that face starts to get a nice, clean, smoothed out transition on what we're actually doing with it. So we can do it with the large details, bring them up, bring them down, and get a nice little rounded kind of frequency separation on there. Now the thing that I'm not trying to do here is I'm not trying to take this too far to the point that it looks like a plastic, Ken doll or Barbie doll or something like that. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to smooth things out a little bit so that we don't have all of the imperfections, but we still retain some of the detail. So let me just go ahead and drop this down just a little bit on the overall so we can get rid of some of that detail there. And really, when it comes to this artistic portrait, it doesn't necessarily matter too much how far we take this, because when we use the impression stuff, we are going to pretty much be blurring all this stuff out anyway. But this is a very important thing to do right here, because we're going to be using this detail layer later for something else, and we don't want this kind of porous detail to come along with it. So here is the before is right here, and the after is right here. So actually, there's the after, okay, and then here's the before, okay. So we're going to go ahead and press OK on this one. I'm not going to do anything else with the tone and the contrast and the highlights. So I'm just press OK on this. So as you can see now, as we zoom in on this, that things have been smoothed out in that face a little bit. So we do have some smooth out there, but we still have some of that retained detail there. Again, if it's too much of a maybe plasticky look, just go in here to opacity and drop that opacity down a little bit. I really enjoy doing that, having these on separate layers, so I can do that. Okay, so that looks pretty good there. We got our clarity, we got our detail. Now we can start moving into some of the more impressionistic style to get this artistic look. And I will be coming back to this detail layer later. It's very important that we did that, because we're going to be pulling from this with a high pass to get our detail on our image later. So let's go ahead and transition forward into Topaz Impression. I'm press Control Shift Alt and E, and that's going to make a stamp of everything. Again, notice how I'm always making these stamps. If you forget this, don't worry about it. The PDF that you're going to download is actually exactly what I'm teaching you now from the notes. Okay, so everything that I'm teaching you right now, I'm actually looking at on another screen, scrolling through and showing you. So if you don't remember what that crazy hotkey equation is, don't worry about it. It's going to be in your PDF download. So with that new impression layer, I'm going to go to Filter, Topaz Labs, and go to Impression. So Impression is great because it gives us that painted look. I love that painted look that Impression gives us, especially the way Impression does it as opposed to other filtering systems, because Impression will add the strokes of the paintbrush based off of highlight and shadow detail. So any image you bring in there is technically going to be different. Okay, so yeah, a different shot of this will look like a different painted image. It's not like a rendering program where it does the same, looks like a randomized pattern, but you see the same thing kind of happening over and over again. If anyone ever messed with Pixel Blender, which was one of the things that Photoshop put out maybe 5 years ago, that's what I'm talking about. So we're going to go into the painting section here. You have all your presets here on the right. I'm going to go into the oil glaze by Blake Rudis. Now, when I set out to do this oil glaze, I set out to do more of that Renaissance look and feel as I was creating this preset. So if you click in this preset, you notice that we've got something like stroke width and stroke length. And the stroke width and stroke length are going to dictate kind of how much spills over. Now you'll see that like on my hand here, you still have some stuff kind of spilling out where it looks like my hand is in motion. I don't really like that, but let's see what happens if we try to adjust the spill. The spill is going to make it spill out even more. The stroke length is also going to take it out even more. But if we bring that stroke length down, we start to get that more Renaissance look, because I used to be a painter, and when I was a painter, I didn't make my brush strokes outside the lines like this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drop this down to about here, okay, and just bring that stroke length down and bring the stroke width down. And that will give me that painted look. If I bring my stroke width down too far and my stroke length down too far, you're going to start to see the canvas under it because those stroke lengths and widths aren't long enough. So let's just go just before we start to see that. Underneath my nose, you're seeing it too, so we'll bring that stroke length up. I have another suggestion for how to fix any of these outlying areas here. So this preset is a good way to jumpstart everything, but if you notice that your colors are kind of spilling all over the place, go in there and adjust the stroke length and the stroke width. Okay, paint volume might not help, brush size, that might help, it might not help, it just depends. Go through here and make your adjustments. The beauty of this is that the presets are a good jumping off point, but you can take them a little bit further by going into each of these individual areas. Okay. So that's one of my preferred presets to get this jump started with, and then I'll go ahead and go into Photoshop. But before I do that, one of the things I want to do here is drop this strength down to about 70%. Now you could also do this in Photoshop. You could do it in Photoshop or you can do it here. Either way, it doesn't necessarily matter. If you do it in Photoshop later, you have less control over these adjustments now. So you see now I can make this even more of a painted look, but still have that underlying layer coming up because of the strength. If I were to go ahead and open this up into Photoshop, that possibility wouldn't be there for me because I'd only have control of the opacity and not necessarily the stroke lengths and widths unless it was a smart object. So I'm just going to go ahead and open this. And when I open this, you're going to see that I still have that stuff kind of outside there. Here's where we're going to use the clone stamp. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, get this out to about 100%. Let's zoom out one more time. And if we look right here, again, impression is going to make it a painted look, but we're going to get, at the same time, what we're going to get is a loss of detail, and we're also going to get all this stuff splashing all over the place. So I'm actually going to take my clone stamp tool, which is this tool over here, and I'm just going to go ahead and make a brush that's relatively large because my brush size is large, but it's also very feathered because it doesn't have a hardness at all. And I'll just click on the outside here and just slowly go in and just kind of restore this area. If you're using a Wacom tablet, it gives you a lot of control over sensitivity, and that's what I'm doing now. So I can kind of come in here and paint around these edges that are spilling over. You'll see it more in this hand. So if I press the Alt key and just select from here and just kind of paint this in, I'm just painting right around those fingers. Okay, and then I'll do that, maybe it's probably doing it on my shoulder over here. Yep, so on the shoulder area, I'll just press Alt or Option and click above here, and again, select from an area where you're not getting the edge of the canvas, and then make multiple selections with that Alt tool and go through here and really clean these areas up. Now I'm not going to take this too far because I could be cleaning this up the entire webinar. So I just showed you on that shoulder and I showed you on this hand that sometimes you do have to do some cleanup afterwards. I'm going to run one more impression layer, Control Shift Alt and E, and with this new impression layer, I'm going to run a Monet Style look to it. Okay. So go to Filter, Topaz Labs, go to Impress. That's like the new way that the kids are saying it in school. Hey, yo, you run that new Impress? Yeah, that's my take on the lingo that I don't know anymore because I'm not in high school. Okay, so I'm going to go into Monet. Just go to Painting here and go to Monet 1 and find Monet. Where was it? It was in Painting. Maybe it's in the featured section. Oh, it's in Impressionistic. There we go. So let's go to Monet 1, okay? So here we are in Monet 1. And if you look at this one, it's really, really painterly. Okay, it's almost too painterly. I wanted more of a painterly look than the last impression, but not this much of a painterly look. So what I need to do is just drop that opacity down again. So I'll drop that opacity down to about 55% or so. That looks about right to me, and I'll go ahead and open that in Photoshop just to give me more of an impression style of painting here, okay? And even now, if I wanted to adjust this even more, I could drop the opacity down a little bit more on this one and really start pushing that away. So I still have that more painted look. I'm starting to go away from the here's your detailed look. In that first impression layer, it's not quite so painted, and now we have that other painted layer. Again, this is like adding another spice to that meatball, okay? Did I necessarily need to do it? Maybe not, but what it does, I do enjoy. So now I'm going to go ahead and press Control Shift Alt and E and jump into Glow, because what this is missing is that chiaroscuro look. Now there is a chiaroscuro option in impression, but chiaroscuro was DaVinci's way of controlling and manipulating light. He had this really fascinating way of making darks dark and lights light, and really making his images punchy. So that's what Glow is going to help me with here. And you're like, how is Glow going to do that? Okay. Well, let's go to Filter, let's go to Topaz Labs, and go to Glow. And with Glow, one of my favorite things to do with Glow is to use it very subtly. So to use it as just a refinement tool or a way to make things kind of glow a little bit, give them a radiated look without making them look like the energy all over the place. And that's what this is going to do. So if we use one of these presets, or even if we were to go into those presets, you'll start to see that you get these kind of jagged edges around there. And that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for just a nice solid glow. All right, so what you can do with that is down here in this blend mode, change this to soft light. The reason what's happening here is that anything that is lighter than 50% gray will get brighter, but it won't get pure white. Anything that is darker than 50% gray will get darker but never pure black. And what that means, when it's resting on there on soft light, everything is just transparently being applied there. So instead of getting this overly energized looking photo, we end up getting this nice blur that brings out our highlights and our shadows really well when we change that to soft light. Okay, so we change that to soft light, and let's actually go into this radiate preset here and look at a couple things. So one of the things that I really want to do here is I don't really like the fact that I'm getting a lot of saturation coming through. So when I change that to soft light, if we look at our original, I like the overall luminosity of this image, or the overall tone of this image. When I do this, it just makes my colors look like circus vomit. Again, I don't really like them too much. So I'll drop that overall saturation that's happening here. So basically, if we go back to normal, it's almost doing a black and white. So here you see that idea of the 50% gray and how things get brighter when they're whiter and darker when they're blacker. So if we change that to soft light again, we have nice resting overall glow over our image that's boosting those highlights and those shadows in that chiaroscuro type of way that Leonardo is very well known for. I highly recommend that even if you're a photographer, you look at the artists of the past, because the artists of the past are going to give you so much more insight than any of the artists that are doing it now, even from myself. Okay, so at this point, you can go ahead and boost up any of these details and see how this stuff is starting to come through. If you like that when we increase this electrified detail, our darks get a little bit darker, maybe our glow strength, that'll also help with that, darks getting darker, lights getting lighter type of look there. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with where we are right now on this, so I'm going to go ahead and press OK. I've got a couple more things that I need to do here. The first thing is Topaz Texture Effects. So in Texture Effects, I'm going to press Control-Shift, Alt, and E, make a new layer. That's going to be Texture Effects. So I'll just call this Texture. Okay, and Texture Effects is kind of like your jack of all trades Topaz product. I mean, really, you can do an entire webinar just showcasing texture effects, because there is so much that's involved in texture effects. You can see that with each one of these different presets, you get a different interesting look, okay? And some of these looks I don't really like as they are for face value, but I do like what's happening with this crumbling beach, and I know that I can do something with this. So if we open this up and we look at this, you'll see that in this crumbling beach preset here, there is quite a bit going on. You've got a basic adjustment, you've got dust and scratches, you've got color overlays, split tones, borders, textures. All of these interesting things are happening here. I really like what's happening with that texture coming through. I like the basic adjustments. I even like the split tone. I like everything that's happening here, but I don't necessarily like how potent it is over the entire image. And there's really not much I can do right here in texture effects to help that. I might be able to drop the opacity here, might be able to change some of the blending options here, but I find it easier for me to do that in Photoshop. So I don't really want to go too far into what texture effects can do, other than showing you just how many layers are being applied to this one adjustment. But this is what happens when you just select a preset and you say, okay, let me see what happens if I just work with this in Photoshop and see what I can do with this. So that's what I'm going to do here. It's kind of like you go over the top. You adjust something to the extreme so that you can further take things away from it, so it's not so powerful. And that's what I'm going to do. It's exactly what I'm going to do with this one. So with this in texture effects, I'm going to change this to soft light. So let's change that blending option to soft light and see what happens when we change that to soft light. It gives me an overall look of the image underneath, but applies that texture right on top. I also need to drop the opacity here, because if I look here, I'm losing a lot of my original underlying image. So I'm going to drop that opacity down to about 60%, and then I'm going to do another thing. I told you I'm going to show you blend if again. Well, that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to show you some blend if, crazy blend if stuff. So pay attention specifically to this area right here. As I double click right here with blend if you look here, if I move this to the right, it's going to start protecting the underlying. Look at my hair. It's protecting my hair on the underlying layers from anything that's happening in this texture effects layer. This is where texture effects combined with Photoshop can be one of the most powerful things in your inventory. Okay, we'll press Alt or Option, And when we press Alt-Option and click on this little guy here, we can split it and feather it, so that instead of getting that harsh transition where you get like these like pixelated edges, we just press Alt-Option and it blends nice and smoothly into our image. And then we'll do the same thing with our highlights. So this won't be affecting our face anymore. Move this over to the left, press Alt-Option, and split it. And see, there we go. So now we have that texture. It looks like almost like an encaustic. An encaustic was where they actually painted with wax. So it has that kind of encaustic look to it, but it's not quite. And we'll get that from that kind of crackling look back there. Still a little too much, so I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to Gaussian blur that by about, let's say, 3 pixels or so. So that'll just give me a nice refined edge. Now you're thinking, well, you've lost everything in this whole process. You have no detail in here, Blake, and you're right. I don't. I need to get that detail back. So I'm going to take this detail layer. This is where you want to be. This is where magic happens, okay? So if you listen to nothing this entire webinar, these last 2 minutes are going to be the most important 2 minutes of the entire webinar. So if you're sitting there looking at Facebook, stop and watch this. We're going to press Command or Control J to duplicate this. We're going to drag this up to the top of our layer palette. Okay, so now it looks, all we have is that detail layer on top of everything. All right, we're going to change this to linear light, and it's going to look really ugly. Okay, once that's changed to linear light, we're going to press Control, Shift, and U, or Command, Shift, and U on a Mac. And what that's going to do is, if we just look at this layer by itself, it's basically giving us a 50% gray or black and white image. And you're like, well, how is this going to do anything? Well, this is where the trick comes in. We're going to go to Filter, Other, and High Pass. We change this to High Pass. Look at what happens with our detail areas. My hair comes back. My eyes come back. The most important part, my fingernails come back. Look at the before. Look at the after. Okay, we'll show it on the before and after on the actual image because it might be easier to see. So again, I'm going to start real high. I'm actually going to change this to 3. If I was ever doing a linear light high pass on, say, a landscape image, I would change it to about 0.5. Nothing at 3, okay? But for this specific image, we're going to go to 3 pixels. It's a very, very stark high pass. And the reason why is look at the highlights that we get from this now. Look at these highlights that we see here. These are often what you would see as a painter would go through. They'd slop on these colors, these brown colors, just like you see here, and then they'd come back in and refine those details with a white, very thin brush. I know this because I used to be a painter, okay? So we'll go ahead and we'll zoom out here. That's way too close to my face. We'll zoom out here, and now we can apply this to just the areas that we want to apply it to by making a mask on here. So again, this is a little too much, so I'll drop this opacity down. Okay, so I'll drop that to about 60%. I always start real high, and then I taper it down. Okay, so taper it down, and then we can make a mask on here. When I make this mask, I'm going to invert this mask. So the way masks work is anything that's white will reveal, and anything that's black will conceal. White reveals, black conceals. So I'm going to press Command or Control I and conceal the entire thing. Okay, and you're like, well, this isn't doing anything. Well, let's change this over. We got our brush here. We've got white selected. Here's our mask. I'm painting back in all the areas that I want detail. Where do I want detail? I want it in my hair. I want it in my ear. I want it in certain facial areas. I want it in my lip. I want it in my nose. I want it in my eye. I want it in my eyebrows. I want all that stuff to still have that same detail. Where else do I want that detail? Well, if you saw our fingers before, here they are now. Let's brush this back in, get our fingernails back. These are the types of details that a painter would be looking at, okay? So if you were to just use an impression layer, like I said before, if you just use an impression layer, that's not going to be a very tasty meatball, okay? You need to add the spices to it. You need to go ahead and spice this stuff up and get all these little details in here so that your image is set apart from everyone else's. Where else do I want this? Well, I probably want some right here because I want that part to look more like an actual mechanical part. I'd probably want more on this shirt here where this stuff is fading in. I'm just kind of brushing this in very casually, and this is where you get to use it. Again, if you were like, oh my gosh, Blake, you're moving at lightning speed, don't worry about it. All of this stuff I said I'm teaching you right from my notes in this PDF that you can download later. So let's look at our overall before. Here's our overall before. And then here is after I put our little chest beam on there. We got clarity for our tone and our color. We've got detail to get that frequency separation type of look where things are nice and smoothed out. We've got that first impression layer, our first spice in the art. We've got our second impression layer, our second spice in that meatball art. And then we got the glow to make things kind of more vibrant. And then bam, that texture effects. And then boom, we got that detail to bring it all back. So Renaissance portraiture is a lot easier than you think, and it can all be done digitally just like this. You just have to know what spices to add to that meatball of the art, so to speak. It's funny that I was just sitting there making meatballs with them last night as I was thinking about this webinar, because usually you don't understand what goes on behind the scenes is that these webinars, there's about, I'd say, 40 hours of prep time for these 40 minutes that I'm showing you stuff. So a lot to learn, but don't get discouraged. If you watch this webinar and you said, oh my gosh, you're moving at lightning pace, slow down, bro. Here's the thing. This stuff comes in time. Take one little article from this entire webinar, focus on it for a week, then come back to it. Take another little article, focus on it for a week. That's how you get better. You don't get better by seeing this stuff in the flash of 45 minutes. It's impossible. But over time, and as you progress with your skills, you will get better and you will get to this point. It's going to happen.
Cool. Thank you so much, Blake. This has been an awesome session. Lots of things that people weren't aware of and are raving about on the comments area, saying they really appreciate that you showed them certain tips and they're going to take that away into their workflow. So thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me. It's always great to be here. So, I feed off of this stuff. I love it. And seeing all these comments come through, it just really makes my day, and I appreciate that.
If you want to follow Blake, you can do so at everydayhdr.com. And if you want to sign up for upcoming webinars, you can do so at topazlabs.com/webinars. You can also contact us at webinars@topazlabs.com if we weren't able to get to some of your questions here today. Thanks again, Blake.
Thank you very much.
All right, everybody, have a great evening or morning or afternoon wherever you are, and we'll be talking to you on Thursday. Thanks, everyone.